Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today, I want to talk to you about war comics. I'm going to talk about one specific war comic at the end of this video, which is Sgt Rock. But for the most of this video, I think I want to talk about war comics just in general. And it feeds into a lot of different things that I've been talking about in my videos lately. War comics are something that I grew up on. They were already there when I was a kid. They were just there. I don't even know where they came from. They were probably shoved in a duffel bag by somebody else in my family and taken to places when they were soldiers. Most probably, and then they just got thrown into a box when they got home. But I grew up reading things like Sgt Rock, The Unknown Soldier, The Losers, The Howling Commandos, Fightin Marines, a lot of these good old war comics. And they're just dog-eared now. They've always were since I can remember them. Just beat up old things. But they had great stories, really great stories in them. And I grew up reading them. And it gave me some idea of what comics should be without me even realizing it when I was a kid. Now, I talked a little bit about jungle comics in one of my other videos, and jungle comics as we'll say, subgenre of comics themselves work well, and I think they work well just like war comics work well. Why? Because they have something in them. It's not to buy these things for nostalgia, because I was looking at in my other video about whether or not I was going to buy that copy of Jungle Comics that's coming out, the Indiegogo, which I think still has some time left on it now. And I decided, yeah, I'm going to buy this. Not for nostalgia's sake, but because it's a basic story and it works well with comics. Jungle Comics have as their core just action adventure. And that works well with comics. It feeds into how comics work, and it works well. And war comics are the same. They have a basic story that works well with comics. Now, with Jungle Comics, it works well through action adventure. How does it work well with war comics? Now, if you grew up, I don't know, even from the 50s to the 80s, you probably understand why it works well without even thinking about it. But if you've grown up, I'd say even in the 90s or afterwards, you probably don't get it. And it's because it's a concept which has kind of been drummed out of people by the left, by leftist media. And it's the very simple fact that soldiers are heroes. That's the basic plot of all of these comics. It's baked into it. Soldiers are heroes. That's why they work well in comic books. That's why war comics work well. And everybody for a long time just understood this. It goes back a long ways, because I was talking about in my video why SJWs kill heroes. It's that even for the last 3,000 years, the idea of a hero, the old idea that has been run through all of Western civilization, is that a hero is a hero because I talked about it in terms of heroes are more moral than you. That was actually sort of a bad translation of the Greek. It's more that they are more virtuous than the normal person. That's what heroes are. That's why they become heroes, because they're more virtuous than the normal person. And soldiers, by their nature, before their day even begins, and before their story even begins in a book, in a comic, they're already more virtuous than the normal person, because they have decided beforehand that when they wake up this morning, they will give their lives for a greater cause. They will give their lives for other people. That's just baked into them. That's their life. That's the basic truth of their life. That's what happens. And that makes them heroes because they're more virtuous than the normal guy on the street. And that's the basic definition of what a hero is. And it's been so in Western civilization for more than 3,000 years. As, I think it was Pericles that said it 2,400 years ago. Being a soldier covers over a multitude of all your faults. Why? Because you become that person who automatically says, I'm going to get up today and give my life, if necessary, for this greater cause, for these people around me. And they are heroes. And that's why they work well. That's why war comics work well. Because right from the get-go, before your story even begins, you got yourself a hero. Now, they're a different kind of hero than most people today would be used to. They're a different kind of hero than superheroes, but it works well. And I think this is a genre that people really need to bring back in comics. Just like they're trying to bring back jungle comics. I think that people need to try to bring back war comics. And I know that they might not do as well as superhero comics today, but it's a good genre to tell a story in. And I think that these would work well. But there's a reason why you don't see them on the shelves anymore. And again, we'll go back to, actually, there's probably two different reasons. First reason is that, when I was reading these Sgt Rock and Unknown Soldier and all these kinds of things, these are all World War II stories. All right, and they're written in the 70s and early 60s, 70s, maybe a little bit early 80s. And there was a lot of people out there to buy them because they had a lot of people out there that had the common experience in their memory or in their parents' memory of going to war in World War II. And if you grew up in the 70s and the 80s, there was that common experience of the Vietnam War. If you didn't grow up in the 70s and 80s, you might not know this, but practically every second movie or show would have some guy in it that was a Vietnam vet. That would be the basis of a lot of movies. Everything from Clint Eastwood movies to the A-Team. That was their basic plot. These were guys. They were soldiers. They were in Vietnam. This is a common trait of these characters, and it was because people understood there were these people. Everybody knew somebody. These days, you don't get as many of those people around, supposedly, but you do have people from the Gulf War, people from Desert Storm. There are plenty of conflicts. There are plenty of soldiers out there. And I think that also feeds into one of the things that I do believe it was Captain Cummings was talking about, and that, a good chunk of the comic buying population are soldiers. Because comics are light and easy to throw in a duffel bag, and you can use them and abuse them because they're pulp fiction and they're great stories, and they speak to soldiers because, again, they're usually about heroes, and that speaks to the heroic nature of the soldier himself. So it's no wonder that comic books get read a lot by soldiers. But in the last, we'll say, even 20 years, there's been a concerted effort, really. And people have looked at this, people have studied this sort of in a not really academic way, but really pointed out these things within our culture. But there's been a real shift in the last 20 years, especially by the mainstream media and by Hollywood, to get rid of soldier stories. And it's not me talking out of my hat when I say that. Plenty of people have noticed this trend. Even directors and actors, they're going on about why aren't good stories, good soldier stories written anymore? Why aren't there good war movies anymore? Because there used to be, I grew up on war movies. I mean, they used to be on the TV all the time. there aren't any really good war movies left anymore. And there was a funny story that came out of Hollywood from a director, and they were talking about Sniper, which was a Clint Eastwood movie. Because Clint Eastwood, he's not a lefty by any means, right? Because Hollywood was pumping out, well, I won't say pumping out, but there was a steady stream, a trickle of kind of war movies or small series about soldiers, and they never did well. They really never did well at all in the box office or for sales or for anything else. And then Sniper came along, and they thought, well, it was just going to be another flop like most of the other war movies that had come out, and it turned out to be a really big hit. And they couldn't figure out why this movie in particular was a really big hit. And it's really the director who was talking about this, he hit it on the nail hit the nail on the head when he said, well, there's a really simple reason why it did well. Because all of your like lefty kinds of movies about soldiers and about war, they all basically assume that soldiers are bad people, that they're in some way, shape, or form warped, that they're the evil ones in this story. And again, that goes back to the whole thing that I was talking about a while ago about that's what kind of the basic idea of leftist ideology is, that institutions are bad. People aren't bad, but institutions make people bad. One of these institutions that make people bad is the military. Oh, they believe that. That's one of their core beliefs. And so automatically when they make a soldier story, well, the military is bad and the soldier are bad. And they're going to have to come to that realization that they're evil people, basically. But no, Sniper went the opposite of that. And it showed that this guy, who was a soldier, an ex-soldier, he was a hero. And that's why the movie did so well. And Hollywood just couldn't understand why it did so well, because they can't see past their ideology. They could only see bad equals soldier. But when you have Clint Eastwood directing a movie, soldier, he's the good guy, he's the hero, automatically. But that's been drummed out of most of the last generation, that idea. And so, well, at the very least, the leftists try to drum it out of most people in the last generation. So if someone came out with a war comic today, and I really think that someone should really come out with war comics today, they'd probably get just steamrolled by people on the left saying how they are warmongers and everything else, trying to teach kids about being soldiers and about war and all these things and how horrible it would be. It's not horrible at all. It's life. We live here in our comfortable little countries in the West, and we think that this is the way it should be, and this is the way it was, and this is the way it is in the rest of the world. It ain't this way in the rest of the world. Conflict is just a normal part of most people's lives. We should be thankful for soldiers, and we should be telling these stories. I think Diversity in Comics was talking about the fact that you can't really get a really good storyteller for comics, a really good writer who's younger than 40 right now. And I think part of that problem is what I've just been saying, that, the left is trying to drum all these ideas of what a hero is out of the minds of young people. But a really good story, a really good line of stories could be told with war comics. And if you don't get what you used to have in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where you got a person who was a soldier also being a good storyteller, then you should get a good writer and pair him with a soldier and get a good story out of that. Because these could be great selling comics, I would believe. I think just as they're trying to bring back jungle comics, they should bring back war comics and show people basic heroes. And that's where I get into my Sgt Rock. Now, I've been showing you pictures here on the screen just some pics of the beat up old war comics that I have stuck in a box. And one of these that I have stuck in a box is Sgt Rock number 318. The title of the book is Soldier or Savage. And it's not as you would think it would be. I'll give you some of the art from the inside of the book here too as well. But it's talking about, it's what Sgt Rock in this entire book, he's talking about, it's always been this way for people. His guys in Easy Company, because that's his company, they're being chased. In this book, they start off right from the get-go. They're exhausted because they're being chased down by Germans, by the Nazis, because we're talking World War II here. And, he's telling them, quit complaining. You want to survive? Get moving. And you know what? No, it's not a situation that's just you. It's not just you that has had to go through this in your life and just now. It's been that way from the beginning of time, since people were cavemen, since they were savages. That's what the story's about. He's saying it's always been this way. Get up and move. Stay alive. You gotta fight. That's the basic story of Sgt Rock. That's the basic story of this Sgt Rock in particular as well. And it's a great story. It is a great story. It is well told. It's got narration by Sgt Rock himself. And it just works beautifully. It is one of the best comics that I have. It's a beat up old comic. It's never going to be worth anything, but I'm never going to throw it away, no matter how beat up it gets. And there's a lot of things in this comic that, you just look at it today and you notice these things that you wouldn't normally. I certainly didn't notice them when I was a kid. You wouldn't have noticed them probably until the last 10 years rolled around. Things like the fact that you look at Easy Company, they have, we're talking about World War II here, right? And in Easy Company, I'm just picking out, from my mind, you got black guy, you got Native American, you got a whole bunch of different kind of people. And these are books from the 70s. And they were also from the 60s as well, talking about guys from the 40s. And, nobody cared. Nobody cared. They knew that people are people. You don't have this ridiculous idea on the left today that, there were never any colored heroes. There were never any people in comics to be heroes until Black Panther came out last year, which is a ridiculous notion. And everybody who actually knows comics have jumped on it and said, this is a ridiculous notion. And here we have Sgt Rock with all these different casts of characters. Whole bunch of them. Why? Because as a soldier, guess what? You know that there's only one color that matters. And the color that matters is that everybody bleeds red. That's it. You don't care otherwise. That's all they care about. In these books, nobody gets treated any different. And again, these are stories about the 40s. These are stories from the 60s and 70s. Nobody cares. Nobody. There's a part in this Sgt Rock in particular where they have to distract this German plane that's trying to strike them. And Sgt Rock says to one of his guys, take off your uniform. They're going to make a dummy so that they can lure him in. And the guy that he tells to take off the uniform, he's the black guy. And nobody says and stops for a second and goes, hey, you can't do that. That's racist. You can't tell the black guy to take his clothes off. How come you picked him out of the whole company to do that? It doesn't even enter into anybody's mind, not even in the slightest way, because nobody back then cared. He's just a guy, like every other guy in the company. He bleeds red, just like everybody else. And that's one of the things that war comics, I think especially, can show everybody, is the fact that, you know what? In real life, where you got to deal with real consequences, and certainly where you got to deal with life and death situations, nobody cares what color you are. Nobody cares about anything else. You're just a guy. You're just another guy. You bleed red, just like me. And that's it. If you want to talk about anything else over and above that, you can do so in your downtime. But, in real life, just try to be a good person. That's one of the basic stories of, it's not even a basic story of war comics, but it's one of the backdrops of war comics. You get these guys, they're trying to survive. They're trying to do what they can to stay alive and to be good. Because again, the coward in these books, he's the one that everybody looks down on. Not the guy that has a different color skin or anything else like that. It's the coward. So, you need to be a hero. And I love these comics. And I think that war comics should make a comeback. I don't know how well they would do. And I was hoping that when I looked at the Indiegogo for Iron Sights, that it would sort of be a war comic. It would be kind of like Sniper and be about a soldier, be about his life. It didn't really turn out like that. So I'm hoping that somebody else picks up the idea of making a good war comic. And, in the vein of these older war comics, they don't even need to be hyper violent. They don't need to have extreme gore. They don't need to have foul language. They don't need to have lurid situations or anything else to make them a good comic, to make it a good story, to make it about soldiers. Just talk about heroes and show their lives. Show them being heroes, trying to live, survive, be good, to fight the feeling of being a coward and turning around on the battlefield. That's all you got to do. So, I would have liked to go into Sgt Rock, this particular Sgt Rock, in a little more detail, but, I've gone on for 20 minutes about this, so I'm going to leave Sgt Rock maybe for another day. I might do an Unknown Soldier one of these days as well. Those would be the top two. Those would be the ones that I remember, besides GI Combat, of course, GI Combat. There were some great stories, beautiful stories in GI Combat. If I can find one, because I've been searching through my stuff to find one with a particular story that I can remember from when I was 7 from GI Combat. Beautiful stories. And if you've never read war comics before, I suggest you go find some. You might have to find them online. Go to your local comic stores, see if they have any Sgt Rock, see if they have any GI Combat, Unknown Soldier. These are really good stories. And they got beautiful art too, some of them. In these Sgt Rock, I think it's Joe Kubert who's doing most of the art for these Sgt Rock, and they're just amazing. It's just amazing art as well. Anyway, I'll probably talk a little bit more about war comics one of these days. I'm hoping that I have another chance to do so. And I'm sure I missed a lot about what I wanted to talk about originally anyways. So I will be trying to fit in another one of these videos soon enough. But until then, I just ask you to hit like, hit subscribe, share this video if you liked it at all. I love it when people share videos. It's great for me. And it's great to get these ideas about comics out there and hopefully make comics better by getting people to read better comics. And Sgt Rock, it is a better comic. I'd like to give you good runs of it, more specific good runs of it later on sometime, but Sgt Rock, Unknown Soldier, GI Combat, any one of them, they are better comics. All right, so I'll see you later. Bye.